Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Bloom the Podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode. I'm your host, Donovan. I'm here with my co-host, Ashley.
Yo.
What's going on? Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hope you guys are all doing well and living life, staying up with all of our previous episodes. If you guys didn't see last week's episode, make sure you guys check that out. That was a super good one that we did with Aaliyah and her husband Brian when they were in town. So we had a really good conversation with them. So I would highly recommend you guys go check it out. But yeah, how you doing, Ashley?
I'm pretty good.
Good? Feeling good. I finally got a haircut.
Wow.
It had been 5 months, guys.
5 months.
I feel like a
That's
new man.
on you, man.
No, well,
the barbers have been open.
Yeah, it's definitely on me. But anywhoosies, jumping into today's episode, we have a fun one in store. I don't know if you guys were up to date on a couple episodes we did. I think it was episode 17, where we talked about females and the more aggressive, quote unquote, that you might say, in the relationship field. We kind of talked about that a little bit. And that kind of had me thinking about roles for men and women. Because like we said in that episode, typically someone would look at that girl or that woman and say that she's not in her role. Yeah. So stemming off that a little bit, I kind of wanted to talk about the roles between men and women in relationships, expectations for those roles, and kind of what we think about when we think about success in your role. Because there's a lot of worldly things that I feel like seep into our thought process when it comes to thinking about our roles in relationships for men and women. And I think we let it kind of guide. It's a lot of the times it's the driving factor in the way that we think about things, which is not correct. It's not, typically it's not biblical when we're pulling, worldly principles and applying them to our relationship as believers. So with that being said, to kind of jump into it, you're married now.
Yes, I am.
So before you were married, what were some of your, thoughts on your role and how you were going to live out that role before you were married? And what did that kind of look like for you as a woman?
Before I was married, obviously I had career goals and things that I've wanted to do, and I never was oh yeah, when I get married I'm just never gonna think of that stuff again, I still think there's a place and time for that stuff. But my main goal and in my head has always been my husband will be first priority over everything, over work, over any of that stuff. And my main goal is to be the wife I need to be to him and my kids. And if I have time to fit anything career oriented, I can do that. But everything regarding family has to come way ahead of that. And that was always my thinking going into it. So when people would ask me are you going to college and doing this stuff? And I'd say no, I'm really just focusing on, trying to be what I can do to be a good wife when I get married, or a good mom. That's my goal. I want to be a good mom and wife. The responses you get are very odd for being in the Christian community. It's very looked down upon for wanting to be a wife and mother. It's that's it? That's all you want to do? Interesting,
Yeah.
So that was the responses I got most of the time.
Yeah, it's definitely looked at as a secondary thing these days. Now, I will say, for people, it may be secondary for some people because they might not really have a super strong desire to get married. And that's totally fine. Not everybody, is called to that. Yeah. But I would ask as a follow-up question, when you got married, I know you've only been married for what, a month now?
Tomorrow, yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen a dramatic difference in expectations versus reality? Or is it more kind of what you thought it was going to be because that's what you were going into it thinking it was going to be like?
I think it's pretty much exactly what I thought it was going to be. I mean, because you watch your parents and stuff. Knowing my mom and knowing her role as she stayed home watched us kids and took care of dad. Like, all those things I've, like, grown up saying.
Yeah.
So that's just always what I expected. And it's a really hard job. And so I knew taking it on, there was going to be a ton of stuff I had to learn. I mean, it's like a crazy busy schedule. Even only being married for a month, I'm like dying. But it's like all like fun and a joy, obviously. And it's a full-time job. Like, I'm never like, oh, like being a wife is like, you know, so chill and like boring, you know, like I'm just chilling. Like, it is a full-time gig, bro. Full on.
Yeah. And if you guys don't follow Ashley on Instagram, she posts a lot about, you know, being a new wife, and you know, she's kind of been blogging about that and putting stuff on her Instagram. So if you guys aren't following her to keep up with her life as a new wife, make sure you guys follow her on Instagram. The links will be in the description below. Yeah. I'm a poet and I didn't even know it.
Okay. Fire.
But yeah, I think that's true, because seeing mom, like you said, it's it's very intense. I mean, and honestly, it's hard for me to even wrap my mind around this. I was talking about this with Jason the other day, because we were talking about, you know, if we were wanting to have kids or not, because he was talking about that with Melanie or whatever.
Yeah.
And we were saying, like, I couldn't even imagine having more than 2 kids. Because, like, it's hard enough to tend to probably not only your husband, but if you have one kid who needs your attention constantly, then another kid that needs your attention constantly, and then you're going to throw 2 more kids in there that need your attention constantly. And it's like, how does one be a helpmate for the husband, clean, cook, do all these things that, you know, are beneficial around the house, and then tend to 4 human beings, all of us siblings, making sure, you know, we're getting biblical advice, making sure we're getting, you know, taught and, you know, going to stores, buying clothes, all the stuff that just comes with growing up as a kid. I still have no idea how either mom or dad handle that. And there's people that have way more kids than 4, which is beyond me. I don't even know how that works.
Even like when Aaliyah and Brian were here, like I was just married only for like 2 weeks, so I was like still learning my stuff with like Nikki, and then I was like trying to do like laundry and stuff, and then I was like watching Judah, who isn't even my kid, and I was like, it's too much.
Seriously, like, it's crazy. So I definitely think it's an underrated role. Like, when people look at it as a whole, they're just like, oh, well, I'm home all day and I'm not making money, and like, you know, all these other things that kind of the world prioritizes above that. So I think it's important to kind of value the mother and the way that she holds the family together in a lot of ways, with the service she provides, not only to her husband, but to her family, if, you know, they have a family.
I mean, you see that in the Bible, like how like important that role is. So the fact that people like downplay it is just,
and
I don't know why you would.
And that's one thing that is important for me, at least when I'm looking at it for myself. You know, you have to prioritize what is the most important to you. And like I said before, not everybody is always inclined to want to be married, and that's totally fine. But I think for a majority of us, and this is where, you know, our stances on young marriage typically come into play, because human beings, generally speaking, we're companion based. We love the companionship. We want to be around people. We're social beings. You know, we like to have that partner that, you know, we can talk to and everything like that. And I think it's super important. So giving that fact of who we are naturally as humans, why would we put that off, you know, for a job per se? And obviously I think it's important to have a career, especially if you're a guy, because we'll get into this in a little bit, but men have their own roles as well, that, you know, as providers, as leaders, as protectors. And, you know, so obviously it's a lot more important for men to be able to provide for their wife, and to be able to, you know, make sure that she has everything that she needs. That way she can be the helpmate that she, you know, wants to be. So, you know, it goes both ways. But I think it's super important to, if you want to be married, that's what you should look at, you know, as your goal. And obviously, you know, you have your career and whatnot, but like you said, that comes kind of at the latter end of the priority list, if wanting to be married is on that list at all. Because you can't really, if your job is hindering you from serving the person that you're with, you need to reevaluate your priorities, right?
Because I think also a thing for me is like I can totally cram everything in to one day, like everything that needs to get done. But then when it comes to like things I like have to do after I just crammed all that stuff in, like doing laundry or like, oh, if Nikki's hungry, like what if I need to make him dinner? Am I going to have like a good attitude doing it? Because I'm like, well, I just had a full on day. Like, what did you do? You know, like knowing that I like these things are priorities, I need to make sure that I'm going to be able to do that with like a happy and joyful heart, which means I need to like prepare myself mentally, meaning like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be doing all this today, so that way I'm not overwhelmed when it comes to things I know I need to be doing, and that's like my first priority.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's tough because, I mean, when you work a job, jobs are demanding, especially if it's something that you've, you know, gone through college for, and it's, you know, super extensive and it takes a lot of time. And all power to you if, you know, that's what you're pursuing. But, you know, if that is, like I said, if that's getting in the way of you being able to minister to your husband or to your family, and, you know, you have to look at that and say, okay, how can I, you know, put my family in its proper place on the priority list? Maybe you don't work, you know, and those are the, you know, sacrifices you make depending on, you know, the life that you want to live. And I feel like, I think, you know, it's tough, but I
think it's just like really sad because I feel like everyone these days is like brought up almost like some sort of like feminism thing where it's like if you're not working, like you're less than everybody else, you know, like you're not as much as a woman, a powerful woman, if you're not working and balancing a family and doing all these things on top of each other. And that's just like sad because like we've been saying, like the role of like a wife and a mom is like so important, and like I just don't understand how you're like, I just don't understand the thinking behind like, oh, I'm much more of a woman because I balance all these things.
I think like what you said, it's almost like feminism in a way. And that's what I was saying to start is the church has kind of adopted the worldly view of what success looks like. Because success looks different for everybody. But for Christians, when it comes to you wanting to be married, that success should look roughly the same when it comes to fulfilling your role for your husband or for your wife. Right. Because you're no less if you have a different goal. Like if you're not super career oriented, you want to be a wife, that doesn't make you less successful. That just means you have different goals.
And it's kind of like a similar thing to like people who go to college and people who don't go to college. People who go to college are like looked at as like, oh, like they're actually like living life, and the people who aren't going to college are just sitting around in their parents' basement. But it's like all of us didn't go to college, and I'd say we have been grinding, man. Like we're out doing what we need to do, getting jobs, like doing stuff on the side projects, I mean all these kinds of things. And so like it's just kind of the same thing, like everyone just like is like, oh, if you do this one specific thing that makes it sound like you're doing better than everyone else, then facts.
And I always say this too, and I brought this up in a previous episode with Aaliyah. People live their life like boxes and check marks. So you have your high school box, you check that off, then you can jump into college, check that box off. Once you're out of college, you get a job, check that box, pay off your debt, check that box, and then you can get into a relationship. And it's like, why can't we as believers develop multiple facets of our life at the same time? And like, if you want to go to college, fine, but you shouldn't have to put the rest of your life on hold to, you know, to go to college.
Well, marriage and family just isn't as important.
So
that's the thing. We're being taught to make that not a priority.
And that's where the expectations of the roles get really fuzzy, because then the wife's expectation is like, well, I'm supposed to have a job too once I get my degree. And it's like, okay,
and then it's like,
that's
you're
fine.
not thinking about like what job I want, you know? And then it becomes that argument between a husband and wife, which is like, that argument shouldn't be happening, you know, when you signed on to marry this person. Not saying you can't have your goals and dreams and you guys can discuss that, but what is your priority? You should know that in your mind before you married that person, that your priority, his job comes first, because he should be the breadwinner, which we'll get into.
And that's one thing too, because for me personally, I don't know if I'm a minority in a group like this for guys, but I personally don't care if my wife works or not.
Right.
Especially in the beginning, because I'm not super big on kids. If the Lord says this is the path that I want you on for kids, then I'm all for that.
Right.
But for me personally, I'm not like in some super big rush to have kids. So I'm all for, my wife working, but it still has to be, like I said, that priority list where if your life takes a turn, because the Lord has a funny sense of humor, and if he says, you're going to have a kid 1.5 years in, it's like, okay, well, what are we doing now?
Right.
So you have to be able to have that mindset where it's like, this is what I've chosen to do because I'm committing to this relationship, this marriage, this relationship, whatever.
Right.
Whatever comes on that path is what you do to compromise and be selfless for the whole relationship as a whole. So it's like people are so self-focused, and the world kind of makes us lean that way with the way they push our priorities to be on, get your careers, to be financially free, do all these other things. We take the sovereignty of God out of it, and we project all our own successes with studies and extended educations and all these other things, and we swap out all these different moving pieces, and it just becomes a jumbled mess of people that are confused and don't know what they want to do or what they should prioritize.
Right. And like that's even like people who like kind of piggybacking on what you said, like people go to college and they don't even have anything they want to do. They're just there because like, oh, well, I need this, right?
Yeah.
No, you don't need this. But like kind of like off of what you were saying, like I just feel like, I don't know, I just think that people like it's okay to have a job. Like when you get married, like even for me, I just got hired at Jamba Juice because like I want to like get money to help me and my husband. Like it's not for the purpose of like my enjoyment. It's for the purpose of helping my family. And like great, it'd be amazing if we could all find jobs that we like really enjoyed and like all those things. But for me, if you're coming into this with the mindset of like you want to have a family, you have to be willing to give it up.
Yeah.
When the time comes. And that's the thing. People are not willing to give it up when the time comes because, oh, well, I really like enjoyed this.
Yeah. Like I put so much time into it, and, I feel like I'm wasting money and all that.
Exactly.
But I have another thing that I wanted to say on that. But before we do, want to give a quick shout out for this campaign that we're still running for ourselves. Strictly for ourselves. This is Sparkling Ice, guys. We're going to tag them in the comments below. If you guys haven't already been tagging them, make sure you do, because we need that sponsorship. Yeah. I said it right this time. Gotta love ice, man. Make sure you guys tag them below. But anyway, jumping back into it, like you were saying, it's super important to be able to be selfless and sacrifice when the time comes. And that's an important conversation that needs to be had in the dating, process when you're, figuring if this person is really the person for you. And I know that looks different for everybody, but for you, what did that look like when it comes to like figuring out where the compromise and where the balance is?
Well, for me, I had already told Nikki, like in the beginning when we had first started talking, that my ideal goal was to just be a wife and a mom, and like I wasn't super career oriented, and I think he really like appreciated that. Like I think it was like kind of like a thing for him because he'd been raised to like college is a really big deal, and in our family college isn't as big of a deal. And like he's growing up in that church where they all think that college says a lot about a person. But I think as he got to know me and stuff, he like really like grew to like respect that like my goal was to be a wife and a mother, because when you really think about it biblically, it's like that's a good goal to have, and like it was really cool though, because even with that, he still like encourages me to like do those like career things for myself, like small things, like just doing my Instagram business stuff. Like he encourages those things, but I think with in mind that he knows that my first priority is always going to be family, not that, but I can do that in enjoyment on the side,
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, that's really cool. And it's always nice to be able to have people that appreciate what your goals are, whether you're a career oriented person and you want to have a job, or whether you want to be a wife and a mother. And, you know, I think it's also important to note too, and we were kind of talking about that with Dad before we started, is, you know, sometimes the wife has to work. Like, it's not really an option.
Right.
You know, so it's like money's tight. Like, it is what it is.
Right.
And, you know, that's where, you know, both people in the relationship are, you know, are really having to pull their weight and, you know, make sure even though they're both working, they're still able to sacrifice and be, you know, the companion and the partner for the person that they're supposed to be.
Yeah, because it is hard when you both come back from a day of work, you know, and you're like, so who's cooking, you know?
Yeah.
But like
so pizza?
Exactly. But even so, I still feel like as a wife, I'm like, it's my job to do that. You know, even with like knowing like we both came back. And it's like, it is so great if you marry someone who just like is a really like kind and like giving person, because even when you're like, okay, this is my job, I have to do that, they'll be like, no, like, let me do it, you know? And like, that's a great thing to have, but it's not always like that, you know?
Yeah.
And so like, as a wife, it's like, that might just be how it is, you know? You come home from a long day of work and you have to cook dinner, and you know what? Like, you signed up for this when you married this person, and that's just life, and God will get you through it.
And I think that's one thing as guys, kind of transitioning into talking about guys now, that it's important not to kind of be overbearing with your wife, especially in those situations where maybe your wife does have to work, you know, chipping in for some of those things that, you know, they look at the wifely duties, you know, it's okay to be like, yeah, I'll cook. It's like, yeah, I'll clean, you know, I'll step in and fill in where
just helping, not even like taking over, but like, hey, let's both do it then.
Yeah. Cause I mean, that's the whole benefit, you know, to be able to fill in where the other person, you know, is maybe in a weaker area, or, you know, they don't have the energy to pick each other up when you're at your low, you know, to be able to compensate for those gaps at times.
Right.
And, you know, as guys, that's where being that leader comes in, and really, you know, guiding the relationship so where you both are doing that, you know, keeping each other accountable. And, you know, as men, as the Bible says, to live with your wife in an understanding way, and just know her and what her strengths are and what she needs from you. And, you know, that starts so much further before that. And I think even in the dating phase, you know, it's important for guys to really be taking charge in their relationships, and, you know, not wasting time and being intentional and trying to figure out, you know, how to best serve the person that you're either in a relationship or, you know, trying to marry, or you've already married.
Yeah, don't cause the girls more stress.
Yeah, because I think for guys, a lot of time, especially with college, it makes guys not lead as much, I think, because they're waiting a long time, and, you know, the dynamic is so much different by the time you're 24, 25.
Right. And I think in that phase of when they're in college and like before then, they're like literally treated like kids.
Yeah.
And like, people act like they're kids, like, oh, I'm just in college, you know, like I'm a kid, you know, and I'm just not like in adulthood like that. It's like, you are 20 years old. Like, when you're 18, I'm sorry, you need to be acting like a man and getting your priorities straight, you know?
You heard it here first, guys.
Let me tell you. Okay, like that's like the biggest turn off for me, you know, like when I see people like talk like that, because it's like, why do you want to be treated like you're a kid, and why do you act like you're a kid?
Well, the world tells you you have your whole life ahead of you when you're 23, 24, 25.
Tell that to people who died when they were 7, okay? Like, you don't know how much time you have left. Like, and I just, you get so many like more places if you just like started getting your act together now while you're in college.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, it's harder too, because and I hate to make this all about college, but, you know, I think it kind of hinders the man to be able to provide if he wants to be married young, when, you know, that barrier's there, unless you're going to work and do college, which is even more difficult. You know, if you're going to work, college, and be married, like, that's tough. So, you know, I feel like when you aren't able to get a good job until you're 23 because you've been in college, you know, or even like, well, that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, like, even you get your first, you know, like, real job when you're 23, 24, even like 22, but say you wanted to be married when you were 20, you know, you're putting off, you know, your real desires for what the world tells you you should want. And
well, and that's the thing, like when you're treated like a man and you're told that you need to have your priorities in order and stuff, people who want to go to college are still on the grind to where they have enough money and like they're doing things where they actually could be married during that time. But people who are looked at as kids, and I'm just a kid in college, they're just messing around doing nothing, and that's why they can't get to the place they need to be, because they never had that mindset of, oh, I need to grow up right now because like
right,
I want to get here,
And that's where you see so much of the leadership of the man in the household come through. Because, I mean, I can say for me, I was looking at Dad, who has instilled kind of that work ethic and kind of the understanding that, nothing comes for free and you have to, work your behind off if you want to be somewhere. Like,
right.
When I moved out for the first time and I had, I was moving towards where I was going, I was like, I understand I have to work, I have to save, there's going to be things I'm not going to be able to buy, things I'm not going to be able to do. And I feel like, that's important, especially for me. I feel like it's especially important for the man when it comes to leading, so that way you have a grasp of what life in the real world is like.
Right.
Because sometimes I feel like people think it's like, oh, I went to college and now I got my degree and now I'm going to jump into a $80,000 paying job and not have any worries. It's like, nope. Nope. Once you get out of college, depending on what you're studying, you'll probably jump into a job that's paying like 16 or 17 an hour. And you're going to have to grind. Right. Especially if you're trying to be married. Right. Because $17 might be able to support you in a studio apartment by yourself with maybe a roommate, but with a wife and maybe a kid. So, you're going to have to figure out, and that's what everything's about, is figuring out what to do when your priorities are the way that they are.
Right.
And I think for the man, it's super important, like I said, leading the woman, to really just have that in mind and be like, okay, this is what I think, as what, in his role, and then kind of explaining that to the woman when they're dating.
Right.
So, yeah, I want to ask, like, for you and Nikki, what was Nikki's kind of mindset? I wish he was here for this one, but what was his kind of mindset when he was talking to you about him leading you?
He's always been like, I need to be a good leader. Like, he always used to, like, say that to me. He still does. I feel like, so, like, am I a good leader? Like, ask me. Which is, like, really respectable because he's trying, like, so hard.
Yeah.
And I think for him, it's like hard because, like we said, that mindset of like, oh, you're young and you're a kid, and like it's hard for people to get past that when they realize, like, because I think when he met me, I was like, no, you're a man, you're gonna be my husband, like you got to make all these decisions, we're gonna like go through all this stuff together and you're gonna be the head of that, and like I think that was like a scary like thing for him, but he like went into that role like just like, okay, like I'm gonna go for this, and like he's been like really like great, like he's really taken on that role. But I think it was like crazy because he did kind of come from like that background of like, oh, like kid in college, I'm not gonna get married till I'm like 27, like that whole deal. So for him to take on the role so quickly was like a big huge like change for him, and it just made me respect him like a lot more though, like seeing him come from that to where he is now, like
that's really
very
cool,
respectable, which is something I also kind of wanted to bring up was like submission.
I was just about to say that. It was literally as soon as you were done with that thought, I was gonna be like, that makes me think. But go ahead.
So I was kind of thinking like on the basis of women. Once again, feminism creeps into the church and us girls decide that, you don't get to tell me what to do. I'm your wife, but I'm my own
You're not the boss
person.
Of me.
Exactly. And I cannot stand that, like, no, just no. That's all I have to say on the matter. Yeah. You're not. Like, when you married this man, you gave up your whole I'm your own person thing.
Well, I think that's what deters a lot of people from even getting married, is because the whole view on submissive, be like, oh, well, I just don't want to be told what to do all the time. And that's what I think that's the other correlation that they put with being a housewife, is that they're like, oh, well,
You're a slave.
my husband just comes home and he tells me what to do all day. Like, no, that's not how it works. That's not what it is.
Nikki never is like, you need to do that laundry. You know, like, I know that for myself. If I see the basket filling up, I gotta do it. If there's dishes, you gotta clean it. If it's dinner time, you probably gotta make it. Like, your husband doesn't just boss you around. Like, these are just duties you know at the top of your head that you're supposed to do when you're a wife.
Yeah. And kind of on the guys too, when it comes to having, you know, women submitting, you want to be the leader that your wife is going to want to submit to, right? So it can be on either sides of the spectrum. Whether if you're not leading at all, you're not going to have, you know, it's going to be a lot harder for her to feel like she can respect you if you're not, you know, submitting, you know, or you're not putting yourself in that position of the leader and, you know, guiding her and helping her make those big decisions and, you know, being the protector, provider, all those things. If you're not fulfilling that, it's going to be so much harder for the wife to be like, yes, let me fall under you. And same on the other side, if you're like over the top, like, do this now and do all this, it's going to like, you're going to drive them crazy.
Exactly.
So you have to, it's a fine line that, you know, as the man, you have to walk when it comes to leading your wife in a way where she wants to submit to you and she's happy to submit, you know. And obviously there's going to be times where it's harder to submit, whether it's something that the wife doesn't agree with, or there's a, you know, a disagreement or anything like that. It's going to be a little bit harder. There's going to be strain, but overall it shouldn't be like a stressful process to submit when the man is doing what he's supposed to do.
Right. In your life, you're always submitting to something, whether it's like your boss, God,
your teacher,
your dad, your teacher, you know, like, you better just get it together and do it, because like in your life, it's all around you, you know? And it's like way more of a blessing to have it be your husband, someone like you love and you're one flesh with and that you respect, more than, you know, just some like rando, you know, like submitting to your husband is way different and it's a good thing, you know? Yeah. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. And, you know, that's the beauty of, I mean, that's just one of the many beauties of marriage and, you know, having that depicted.
I mean, it's no one's saying it's not hard, especially for people with really strong personalities like me. Yeah. It's hard to be like, okay, you know, I'm very much not that person, but gotta whip your butt into shape.
And I think that, like I said before, all this stuff starts so much before you're married, I believe, when you're in the relationship phase, kind of working through some of those things. But when it comes to like personality differences, you know, talking about roles, getting all that stuff onto the table, like, okay, this is where we stand on all of this. Right. And this is where we can grow together. This is where we really agree, you know, and it's, you know, it's important to have those conversations. And again, as men, we need to be leading the charge for those conversations because, you know, we want to be making sure that we have a helpmate that's suitable for us and has the same goals. If you guys don't have the same goals, what are you doing? Yeah. What are you doing?
Like when me and Nikki were dating, even though I didn't have to submit to him because he was just my boyfriend, it's not my husband or anything at that point, I still like made it in my mind that like if he makes a decision for us, I'm not gonna be like no and like fight him on it. I'm gonna be like, okay, you know, to like kind of like see how this goes when you're about like thinking about going into marriage with this person. Be like, okay, like I'm gonna let him make this decision, let him be the man. I'm going to practice, you know, listening to someone I respect.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta fall back.
Exactly. And like even though it was hard sometimes, and like later on in like the relationship, after we realized that maybe that wasn't the best decision, we talked about it. It's like, hey, but we like I still respected your decision. You made that decision trying to be a leader and you learned from that and how to lead better. And I learned how to submit even when I don't agree with things. Like that stuff plays into your marriage. So while you're dating that person, make sure you're respecting them. And like, even though don't have to submit to them, like listen to what they're saying and practice like, you know, doing those simple things. If they want to make a decision and try and lead you, go with it.
I would say this, and kind of more of my closing thoughts is, like you're saying, practice. Because when you get married, you're not just going to randomly be like, oh, now I'm able to submit. If all this whole time while you were dating, you were like, well, he can't tell me what to do because he's not my husband. Exactly. You know, it's not, nothing changes overnight like that. Once he puts the ring on your finger at the altar, you're not just like, oh, I submit. Like that's not how it works. And same with guys. Once the ring goes on, you're just like, I lead. Like, you know, you practice those things. They become habitual. and you're able to bring that into your marriage, or at least, that's the goal.
Exactly.
And kind of last closing thought, these are, obviously our opinions about, roles and, marriage and young marriage and stuff like that. Everyone has different goals. Everyone has different paths that they walk. So it's important, to keep that in mind when you're listening to us talk about, our experiences, our path. And, if you going to college, all power to you. Yeah. We don't discourage it. We like college for some things. Sometimes it's necessary if you have a goal you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
We, support that goal 100%.
If you're a boss mom with a full-time job, but also a bomb mom, do you, girl.
We support all that. So, take what we're saying, as our opinions, our experiences, and we hope everyone joins the conversation with us to talk about that. So feel free to drop comments, message us on Instagram what your guys' thoughts are. We can't wait to hear from you guys. But thank you guys so much for listening to the 23rd episode of Bloom the podcast. We hope to see you guys on the next episode, and you guys have a great day.